Introducing the new Sony FE70-200 f4G OSS II lens. This is Sony's 50th full-frame lens, so that's kind of a benchmark we like to think about. Today is launch day, July 12th at 10 a.m. is when this video is going live, but I've been shooting this little guy since June 9th, so I've got some things to offer to tell you about it. The first chapter is on my actual hands-on experience with the lens, what it feels like, how it worked on the 3 different cameras I used it on, and using it with and without teleconverters. To those of you watching a whole bunch of videos about this new lens, the experience chapter, that first one, is probably going to be the most important one, because it will likely differ most from all the other YouTubers that are going to also talk about this lens, because they often just talk about specifications. At the end of all the chapters, I'll show a bunch of photos that I shot with this lens. So let's get started. My name is Pat Murphy-Racy. I'm a Sony artisan of imagery. So while Sony didn't pay me to do this video, they did send me the lens to allow me to use it for like about 3.5 weeks. But they didn't give me an agenda of any kind and say, you have to say this. So this is all my stuff coming from me. A few adjectives I think are important to talk about this new zoom. 1 is new. 2, it's elegant. It's sophisticated. It's tiny. It's lightweight. It's capable. It's sharp. And it's fast on many different levels. I was on a motorcycle trip when Sony called me out of the blue, which is how it works. And they said, hey, we've got this new product we want to send you. Where are you? And I said, well, I'm in Oregon, headed for Olympia, Washington. And they said, well, give us your hotel information and we'll send it to you. And at that point, they wouldn't tell me if it was a lens or a camera. So I had no idea what they were sending me. And so here's some footage I shot in my hotel room the morning that it arrived. You're gonna find out along with me what the heck this new lens is, because I don't know. So here we go. Oh my gosh. So the rumors are true. 7200 f4. Look at that thing. How about that? Try that with your 7200. That's insane. Whoa, this is really nice. Oh, I can't believe how tiny it is. Oh, this is exciting. I love how the hood snaps on there well. And I also love how this collar, which comes with it obviously, can come off. If you don't need it, you can just set it aside and it makes it even smaller and lighter. So that is awesome. So I guess it's time to make some pictures. So why don't you come with me on my little adventure and we'll do that exactly. Sony won't confirm this, but I feel like the autofocus speed on this new f4 zoom is actually slightly faster than the GM2 7200. Using teleconverters seems to be completely oblivious. The lens doesn't seem to know they're there, and it doesn't really retard the speed of the autofocus whatsoever. The A1 loves this lens. Even with 2x, it's great. The AF worked best on the A1, and then almost as good as that was the A7 IV and the A7R5. And those are the 3 cameras that I used throughout my review to kind of check it out. Speed. The autofocus is beyond super quick. It's possibly faster than the 7200 GM2, as I mentioned before. Sony does not publish their autofocus speeds, but in one aspect, this lens is probably the fastest lens that's ever been made, and that would be going from minimum focus, which is just around 10 inches or so, all the way to infinity. There's nothing that could possibly be quicker than this thing. But Sony won't release those specs, so I can't tell you for sure that it's faster than the 7200 GM2, but I feel like it is. Sony does say that it's 20% faster than the original SEL 7200 f4G, which is not a big surprise because that lens is ancient. In Sony years, it's about 30 years old or so. The old 7200 f4G was a great lens because it was lightweight and small and compact and all that, but it would only achieve 15 frames per second on the A9 or the A1.
The macro version, this one, goes all the way to 30 frames per second all day long on the A1, and it'll give you the full 20 frames a second on A9 and A9 II. Size and weight. The weight of the lens, or lack of it, is 1.7 pounds, or if you're Canadian, 794 grams. It's 15% shorter than the original 70-200 f4G, but I think that what's more important than that is that it's 25% shorter than the 70-200 G Master II. So most people will be amazed to find the new macro is 251 grams less than the 70-200 2.8 GM2, which is already super lightweight and feels great. All right, so this lens is a 70-200 f4, yes, but it's also a macro. And what's interesting is it's not a macro at 70 millimeter. It's a macro throughout its entire zoom range. So the entire focal length range that's available, 70 to 200 millimeter, is a macro. So it's really, really quite something. It's sharp at all focal lengths, no matter where you're focusing at, and at all focal lengths. So macro lenses are specifically, they make flat fields across the entire imaging area. That's what makes them awesome. Usually when you go too close to something with a non-macro lens, you start to see the bow of the optic, and the edges get all fuzzy, and it's just not great. This one's not like that. So it's going to be an extremely sharp lens no matter where you have it set to zoom or focus. Now what's really interesting about this one is that it has a 9-blade circular aperture ring. Now the circular aperture is usually 11 on a like a wider lens, and this one's got 9. So you think, oh man, but the deal is the aperture blades are curved, so they make a perfect circle no matter where you're at. So it's a very, very nice organic soft bokeh. I think you'll be very impressed with the macro pictures I show later. The other thing that's really interesting about this lens is this will give you 0.5x macro capability over the entire zoom range. That means it's half of 1:1 right out of the box, which is pretty remarkable. Now, what does that mean, 1:1? 1:1 means if you shoot a picture of a quarter or a loonie, if you're Canadian, it will appear the same exact size on the imaging itself. So like if the chip is 24 by 36 millimeters, the quarter will be the same size it is in real life at 1:1. So this lens is actually doing 0.5 or half of that. So a quarter would be half the size right off the bat. Now the minimum focusing distance is 10.24 inches at 70 millimeters, and it's 14.2 at 200 millimeters. And that's at both autofocus or manual focus. So you get the entire close focusing range either in autofocus or manual. Now for a long time I've had a set of Chinese aftermarket extension tubes. And you can use these in conjunction with the 1.4 converter. But the way that Sony designed this whole thing is really interesting. If you add the 1.4 converter to the new zoom lens, the macro, you'll get 1:1 by adding the converter. So obviously the lens takes both the 1.4 and the 2x, and you can stack the 1.4 converter on top of extension tubes. Now, Sony doesn't make extension tubes at all, and they don't support extension tubes from off-brand manufacturers, but they work great. And I'll list these in the comments section below in case you're interested in getting some. And these are affiliate links now, so I get a kick if you buy them through my link, so I appreciate that. And by the way, teleconverters, the answer is yes. On the Alpha 1, this means that without the teleconverter attached, you will punch in from 105 to 300 at the 1.5x zoom and still have a 21 megapixel image left over. The new 70-200 f4 macro accepts both teleconverters, the 1.4 and the 2x. With the 1.4, it becomes a 98 to 280 millimeter 5.6, and with the 2x, it becomes a 140 to 400 millimeter f8. Now, obviously, if you put any APS-C camera with this new lens, it means the field of view will be 105 to 300 millimeter f4, which is going to be great for a lot of people. Speaking of teleconverters, I'm really hopeful that Sony will one day make a 135 1.8 GM 2 version that accepts both teleconverters and has the 4 XD linear motors inside. But I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying that, so let's move on. Let's talk about the autofocus aspects of the lens specifically. Now the lens has internal focus design, even though the lens is an extension type. So when you zoom it, it's going to come out. Okay, so that's normal for this one. It does have 4 XD linear autofocus motors. These are super high speed, precise. They offer great tracking and deadly quiet autofocus. They also have something called floating focus. There's basically 2 different focus groups inside the lens, and as you zoom and focus, the 2 groups adjust perfectly to give edge-to-edge far focus no matter where you're at in the focal length range or where you're at in the distance range. So also, as you zoom, it will focus as you zoom. So these 2 groups work together while zooming, and you get full AF tracking while zooming. And this is supported in the A1 especially, but it'll do it in other cameras too. But on the A1, it's pretty otherworldly. Now, I shot some soccer, and I shot a series of images of a guy attacking the goal, and you're looking at that right now. And you can see that the lens is extremely quick, and I'm zooming, I'm recomposing on the fly, I'm putting him on the left side of the frame, giving him room to kick the ball on the right, and you can see that the autofocus worked great even as I was zooming. Now, it's been my experience through years that when you're in extreme macro mode, when you're right on top of something, a flower or something like that, you typically can't use autofocus anymore. It just doesn't work because the same rules that apply to super telephotos also apply to macro. You need very high shutter speeds to stop the movement of the flower, especially if it's windy, and the autofocus just can't keep up. But the autofocus actually works quite well at minimum focus even, with the new 7200 f4 macro. Now what I'd recommend though if you do that is I would go to tracking, flexible spot, small, because if you want to like look inside the flower to the stamen, for instance, you can hit the stamen with that smaller spot, and it will actually do quite a nice job of tracking it even as it's waving around. Also, like when you're shooting a bug or an insect on a plant or a flower, again, it'll track and follow pretty well. I mean, it's not going to be 100% because the depth of field is so nil there. And also as you close down the lens, it's going to be more and more difficult. But I would say that at least 50 to 60% of the time, you can actually count on autofocus with a macro lens, which is really pretty remarkable. I just wanted to show the buttons and switches on the side of the lens. It's the same as the 7200 f2.8 GM2. It's also the same as the big teles like the 400 GM and the 600 GM. So there's 3 focus hold buttons. There's an optical image stabilization. There's a zoom lock switch, AF, MF, full-time DMF, focus range limiter. One of the other things I love about this lens is it's got a 72mm filter size. Now, that's the same filter size that's on the 20 to 70G that was just announced a few months ago. More on that later. There are some really serious video advantages with this 7200 f4 macro. The lens has OSS, optical image stabilization. It is really, really good. And remember that OSS works in conjunction with the IBIS, the in-body image stabilization. So they work together, some of them doing pitch and yaw, and the others, they break up the work, giving you unbelievable quality in stabilization. I think that this lens is especially suited to the A7R5 for those reasons. The A7R5 is magical in your hand to just hold and shoot at 200mm even. But I think also FX3, FX6, FX30, the A7S III, these cameras are all going to benefit from the extreme levels of image stabilization that the lens provides through the OSS. Also, the lens is so lightweight, I don't think you're going to have to use rails with it at all. I think you're going to be able to remove that tripod collar and just attach to an FX6, for instance, and just roll with it. It's so lightweight, and when you zoom, because most of the optics are in the center of the lens and not the front, you're not having that much change in weight doing that either. So, and remember, it's still internal focus, so nothing's moving like this, like the old school lenses. Also, I think, people are always used to using neutral density filtration with 2.8 lenses, but this will, I think you can use a little less, and f4 is still plenty fast. So I think videographers are really going to like this one. The bokeh is really super creamy. It looks great. There's very little breathing in the lens. So if you're doing a 2-shot and you're going back and forth, you're not magnifying the out of focus image of the person. It's really, really nice. I think that this is possible to use for sure on a gimbal with A7R5. I think there'll be some amazing video footage out there immediately when the lens gets released. And I look forward to watching some of that. Who will use this lens? Me. That's who. I plan to use it for sports assignments, daytime field sports for sure, auto racing that are like day races. The constant aperture is incredible. So as you zoom, it doesn't change the speed. I think videographers are going to love this with its OSS, its sharpness. Even though there's no aperture ring for video, I think the cost of making that added feature was just not worth it. I'd rather have it smaller and lighter than have the aperture ring, so that's not a big deal for me. But I think that a ton of people will use this for macro work, obviously. People that shoot flowers and close-ups all the time. People that work in photojournalism are going to love this lens because it's so light and small. Auto racing, it's going to be great, especially like the big tracks like Talladega, where you walk all day. You're just humping all the time. But field sports, I think this will be the best goal, like on-goal lens for football, for soccer, lacrosse. That'll be really great to make really good captures there. Let's talk for a minute about what does this lens pair well with. Now for me, and I already alluded to this earlier in the video, but the FE70-200 f4G is an amazing lens, having this massive zoom range from super wide all the way to 70 millimeter. This 7200 macro f4 picks up right there at the same point where that one stops and goes to 200 millimeter. If you add the punch-in aspect on, say, an A7 IV, now you're talking about still having a decent sized file when you're punching in without a teleconverter. I think that the 20 to 70G and the 70 to 200 f4G macro are made for each other. They're going to pair so well for rock climbers, for hikers, macro shooters, also for sports shooters that really have to have every lens in their bag but don't want to carry a lot of stuff. I could see that being a very, very popular way to complement a 600 f4 or a 400 2.8 on jobs. Travel photographers are going to love this thing because between the 20 to 70 and the 7200 and the punch-in or the use of the 1.4 converter, you're going to have this awesome reach from 20 to 300 millimeter and then plus beyond that with the punch-in. Bloggers are going to love this, especially for those who actually shoot pictures of the actual places they visit rather than just shooting themselves all the time. Sorry, I had to dig on that a little bit. But yeah, I think a favorite combo for me, like if people are going to ask me if they're going to switch to Sony and they're kind of tentative about it, I think an A7 IV body with the 2070G and the 72f4 G macro is going to be the sort of the ultimate and lightweight, compact way to move and groove with Sony. So I think those two lenses are also going to work really well with the FX6 and the FX3, especially if it's a B or C camera. That way you've got 20 millimeter all the way to 200 covered no matter what you're into. And last, it's the perfect long zoom to pair with the new ZVE1. A lot of people are going to really like that camera just because of how tiny it is. And the tiny aspect and lightweight aspect of these two lenses, the 20 to 70 and the 7200 f4 macro, are going to really, really be a nice kit for vloggers and people who just want to have the ultimate lightweight one. So kind of in summation, Sony has figured out how to make both cameras and lenses since 2006. They've pushed really hard, and they're the clear market leader in full-frame mirrorless at this juncture. I expect most lenses they make from now on to have the 4 XD linear motors and be sharper than virtually everything that came before them. And this is sort of like, we get used to this as being typical with Sony. The new 70-200mm f4 macro G lens is simply their latest masterpiece. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe if you found it useful, and feel free to use my links, those affiliate links. Thanks so much for watching.